This is a crisis for our country, our economy, our health system, and for each one of us personally. But it is a particularly enormous threat for Black, Asian and ethnic minority staff working in the NHS. They are dying in large numbers, and today we have a huge survey which gives us the first proper glimpse of what they feel are the reasons.
We are very aware that things are not equal yet. Things are not equal.
Also on News at 10 tonight. A significant recession is looming, the Chancellor's gloomy prediction on the economy, but the Bank of England Governor tells Robert why we might avoid renewed austerity. Falling, but by how much? Buyers and sellers are trying to assess the state of the housing market now it is back in business. 10,000 new cases in Russia today, and as the virus spreads, the Russian president's popularity plummets. And the sporting life. It was a busy day on tennis courts and along riverbanks as some sporting venues were back in business.
I'll probably every other day or so probably come down or until the missus says no.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. There is clearly something worrying and unexplained going on in our health service, aside, of course, from the still large numbers of people dying from coronavirus. It is that proportionately more NHS staff from Black, Asian and other ethnic minorities are dying from it than their white colleagues. 7 times more, our research has found. It is hard to work out precisely why, and it will take time before we have all the answers, medical, social and economic. But in the 2,000 responses to a survey we have carried out, most ethnic minority NHS workers, 84%, said they believe it's because they are working in close proximity to COVID-19 patients. Many claim they are being unfairly assigned, with half telling us there is discrimination at play and they don't have the confidence to complain about that or about not getting enough protective equipment.
It's become the desperately sad, recurring story of coronavirus. More Black, Asian and ethnic minority healthcare workers are dying than their white counterparts. If anyone can help explain why, it's the colleagues of those who've lost their lives. In the biggest survey of its kind, we asked BAME doctors and nurses about their experiences on the COVID front line. The results are stark. They don't really care about us, says one. Another will be leaving the NHS as a result.
Things are not equal yet. Things are not equal.
Anu Agbula is a deputy sister at a mental health hospital.
If you did feel sick at the beginning of COVID-19, you were less likely to say that I don't feel well, or you're more likely to say that it's just a cough.
Why?
I think it's probably just the idea that you'd be judged. So if you was the first person to come out with a symptom, you would feel like, oh, they're going to think it's, the black woman that's brought this virus into the hospital.
Anu isn't alone. More than 2,000 BAME healthcare workers contributed to our survey, leaving more than 4,000 similar comments. What came up again and again and again was a feeling of being discriminated against, the idea that they were being disproportionately put on COVID wards. And some spoke of being told to keep quiet and carry on, and others said that they felt like they were working at the coalface, while in management it resembled snowy white peaks.
Some of my colleagues might find it hard to actually speak up.
COVID-19 killed Via Salinasol's best friend, a fellow Filipino nurse. She believes the sense of obligation she has is culturally inherent.
We don't find it in our hearts to say no, to stop going into a ward because we can't cope, because we're having issues with PPE. It's quite a difficult situation to get yourselves into, especially if your job is not just a job, but it's a duty.
Do you think your white colleagues feel the same?
I think they are more confident.
It's clear the overriding sentiment from the survey is that ethnic minority healthcare workers fear for their jobs if they make complaints. Since around 20% of the NHS workforce is made up of these groups, and our evidence suggests they're being put in higher risk positions, many feel change is long overdue.
What we must do immediately is recognise being a BAME doctor puts you at risk.
Dr Chand Nagpal is the chair of the British Medical Association.
This is a real concern, and it's about a culture in the NHS that has existed for a while, and it needed to be addressed. The COVID pandemic, when you consider all the challenges of providing care within that pandemic, about redeployment, shortages of PPE, have in many ways brought to the fore these problems.
The government is also looking into why COVID-19 is affecting minority communities more. We put our findings on discrimination in the NHS to Matt Hancock.
It's something that I'm worried about and I'm determined to stamp out. And especially in this crisis, the value that we have for our healthcare workers has never been higher, and we need to reflect that in respect for, support for, and valuing of every single person.
Unless that happens, the daily emotional impact of watching colleagues who look like them die will not stop.
I can't help but worry. If I get it, will I end up like them?
For Via and thousands of her colleagues, this is now about survival.
And Emily joins us now. Look, that was a startling report. Maybe you could just talk us through the overview of the statistics to begin with.
Yeah, well, there's no official breakdown of deaths by ethnicity, but today our research suggests that for every 100,000 white people who work in the NHS, 6 or fewer will die from COVID-19, while the number of deaths for BAME staff per 100,000 is 42. That's 7 times greater. We asked more than 2,000 BAME health workers why they thought that was the case. 84% told us it was because they were more likely to be deployed to high-risk frontline roles, increasing their exposure, obviously, to the virus. 73% said it was because their colleagues had been working in areas treating COVID patients without enough PPE, while half suggested discrimination or a fear of being discriminated against meant they were afraid to speak out about the dangers. So some pretty revealing thoughts there.
Look, one thing is absolutely unarguable about this survey. It makes very clear what people feel, and it's a devastating indictment of the health service, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's the comments that came out of this survey that I think are probably the most interesting, and it's not very pretty. In essence, they said that they did feel fairly treated. They talk about systemic discrimination. We know that the vast majority of BAME staff in the NHS are in junior roles, so it stands to reason that they would be in higher risk areas. But the evidence in this survey suggests that they are being deployed more to higher risk areas than their white counterparts. One quote says Filipinos and BAME being put at front line whilst white counterparts take time off. Now, that's an opinion, it's anecdotal, but it's a pretty damning perception, I think, of what is going on the front line in the NHS. And the other thing that struck me is this culture of discrimination they talk about. They say that they don't want to speak up because they don't feel represented. They don't feel there's enough of them in the senior management, and there's not the 6%. And the British Medical Association will say until that changes, they will always feel unsupported. NHS England say that it's a priority to keep their staff safe. The government is doing their own inquiry, so we will learn a bit more about this, but at the moment I think all of this is pretty damaging for the NHS.
Well, it was a deeply unsettling report, but thank you very much, Emily. OK, it is fair to say we knew it was on the way. The Bank of England and others had already predicted the worst jolt to the economy for 300 years. And today came the news that in March the economy did indeed shrink by almost 6%. And remember, lockdown only kicked in the final week. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, had to admit a significant recession is looming, knowing that the next set of figures is likely to be far worse. He could hardly do anything else.
On Margate Sands, T.S. Eliot wrote, "I can connect nothing with nothing." People in Margate today are also struggling to make sense of it all. Out of nowhere, a virus has spread. The steps to contain it have shut down large parts of the economy and are causing hardship. The Walpole Bay Hotel has been closed for 9 weeks. It still isn't clear when it will reopen. The owner has weathered 3 recessions, but isn't sure she'll survive this one.
We've got to earn. We've got to earn, and we've got to earn before the summer ends. Otherwise, we'll be doing our own lockdown. We won't survive the winter. Cry yourself to sleep at night. It's been horrendous, and I can't talk anymore.
On the 23rd of March, the lockdown began and activity went into freefall. The economy contracted by 5.8% during March. Output fell as much in a single month as it did in a year and a half after the financial crisis. Every sector of the economy went into reverse. Parts of the services sector were particularly badly hit. Travel agents, hotels, airlines, hairdressers, pubs, restaurants and rail operators all reported a collapse in output. April will be even worse. The data suggests the economy probably shrank between 20 and 25%. And now even the Chancellor admits a recession is inevitable.
Recession is technically defined as 2 quarters in succession of negative GDP. We've had one, but it is...
And we're going to get a second, aren't we?
Well, it is right that we've had one, and that's on the basis of only several days, really, of significant disruption from coronavirus. So, yes, it is now very likely that the UK will face a significant recession this year.
All this as the effort to start unlocking the economy begins.
The hope now is that the recovery, when it comes, will match the scale and the pace of the slump. But the Chancellor is being very careful not to promise that it will. And that's because what happens next depends on how the virus spreads, when restrictions lift, and how people react when they do. And all these things are highly uncertain.
At the bus cafe, they're worried customers won't return for a while, even if they're able to. 5 staff here have been furloughed, others were let go, and the only money that's come in was a grant from the government of £10,000.
Most of our demographic is young families and people that are going through the crisis at the moment who are obviously going to be on low incomes or no income or a universal credit. They're not actually going to be able to have that much disposable income. So to be able to entice people to come back into what you can see is quite a confined small area is going to be quite a challenge, I think.
A town that was on the up now feels up against it. Livelihoods here depend on the return of large numbers of tourists, and until then, the people of Margate are relying on the state to stay afloat. It is the opposite of dreamland. Joel Hills, News at 10.
If we are in for a significant recession, the government is clearly going to end up spending a fortune bailing us all out. So how on earth are we going to pay for it, and how much more austerity might we have to endure when it is over? Well, if you were watching last night, you will have seen Robert make a startling prediction, possibly none at all. And tonight on his show, he has quite a scoop with the Governor of the Bank of England, who explains why the bank may just buy up more or less unlimited amounts of government debt itself and sit on it. Here's what he said.
I think what we can do, providing, the overall credibility of the framework remains in place, and independence is very important to that point, is that we can help to spread over time the cost of this thing to society. And that, to me, is important. We have choices there, and we need to exercise those choices.
All of which leads to one question. If we might not need austerity now, why did we last time? And Robert, as you can see, joins us preparing for his show. Robert, over to you to explain that.
Well, it is very important just to point out before we get on to that the Governor was answering a direct question from me, which is whether there would be inevitably austerity when we're through this crisis. And he basically said no, because, as you pointed out, Tom, he is committing to buy up vast amounts, hundreds of billions of pounds of the debt that the government is issuing, the amount that it's borrowing. This is what economists often call monetary financing. It's basically creating money to give to the government. Now, he didn't put it as explicitly as that. And the point is that during the last banking crisis back in 2008, the conventional view was that if central banks explicitly lent money to governments, that was the end of any credibility that government would have on world markets, and no conventional investor would lend to the government. Interest rates would go through the roof, and that would be the short road to penury. Now, in practice, as we've seen, that hasn't happened because although they never claimed to be lending directly to the government, central bank did create money, and it created money to buy government debt, and Armageddon didn't come in that sense. So now we have a central bank government who can be almost completely honest about what's going on. And what is basically going on is that the Bank of England is creating money to lend to the government, and it will not demand that money back anytime soon, which means that the government doesn't have to make cuts to public services to pay down the debt in any meaningful time horizon. And that's why Boris Johnson can say, as he has said to me when I've asked him, that he has no plans when we're through this to go for austerity.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Now, if you did see last night's programme, you'll remember Paul Brand's latest report on the crisis in care homes. His coverage of what has been going on behind closed doors has generally been deeply shocking and very upsetting. And he'd learned some were about to go out of business as well. Indeed, one already had temporarily because of the extra costs of coping with the coronavirus. Well, today, the Prime Minister announced another £600 million for homes to be spent on infection control. But there were some serious questions for Mr Johnson from Labour about why advice back in February that care homes would become infected was not acted on.
Oh, that's lovely.
At Wren Hall, they're taking extra care right now, both of their residents and their resources. Last night, we reported how COVID-19 means 13 rooms now lie empty here. Soon, the others may too. With the home running out of money, today the government promised its own.
So where's the money going and how do we access it?
Goes to councils and then you've got to get it from the councils. But the manager's not convinced it'll cover costs.
Because of the voids, the empty beds that we've had because of the deaths related to COVID-19, we need that money coming in because our biggest cost is our staff cost.
But today's pledge of £600 million in emergency funding from the government is only for infection control, stopping the spread of the virus, with a named clinical expert to help each home, but nothing to cover the fact that many are half empty.
How does this money prevent care homes from closing?
It builds upon £3.2 billion of funding that we've given in the last 2 months to local councils, the vast majority of which, 90%, has gone to those councils with responsibility for adult social care. And if there's further funding that's required, then obviously we'll consider that in the weeks and months ahead.
But it's too late for Friary Lodge. Last night we revealed this is the first home to close, it hopes temporarily due to COVID-19. There will be a public inquiry into this pandemic. But tonight Westminster isn't waiting.
Until the 12th of March, the government's own official advice was, and I'm quoting from it, it remains very unlikely that people receiving care in a care home will become infected.
It wasn't true that the advice said that, and actually we brought the lockdown in care homes ahead of the general lockdown.
How about this one here, look?
But at homes like Wren Hall, whatever the debate about the care they were shown, tonight they are struggling to provide it. Paul Brand, News at 10.
Today was the day those who can't work from home in England were encouraged to head back. People have been told to avoid public transport, and some of these waiting for the tube in London didn't take the government's advice to put on a mask and keep 2 metres apart. But these construction workers in Leeds did, forming an orderly, socially distanced queue to get back into work, while the motorways around Birmingham's so-called Spaghetti Junction, which like many main roads across the country had been all but deserted recently, were getting busy once again. Well, today wasn't just the first day back at work for thousands of people in England. It was also the day that the English property market reopened, and in estate agents' offices, the phones started ringing again. A lot. The question for them and for buyers and sellers is how much have house prices fallen? Between 5 and 10% seems to be the consensus, but honestly, at this stage, who knows?
The housing market in England has opened its doors for the first time since March. But things look very different.
Hi David, how you been?
From now on, estate agents, buyers and sellers have to follow strict social distancing guidelines to prevent the spread of COVID-19. This is the first valuation David Ellingworth has been able to carry out in 8 weeks. And while coronavirus has affected how he does his job, it hasn't yet affected how he values a property.
I would just value as I've always done. I'm not going to suddenly think this is 10% less than it was 3 months ago, because there's no evidence that it should be any less. I still think there'll be buyers for this house.
Sellers should now be outside the property when viewings take place. Julie will have to clean the house before and after every viewing and should, if possible, provide hand washing facilities.
As long as people take precautions, it's no big problem. Obviously it's different again, and you've got to learn to social distance, and people have got to observe the rules. But within that, I think we can get by.
Many agents are predicting that property prices will fall by anything between 5 and 10%. But interestingly, on day one that the housing market has been allowed to reopen, the property website Rightmove has said it's had a 45% increase in traffic to its website. Jess Heath is already feeling the nervousness in the market. She's had to put her house back up for sale after the offer dropped by £20,000.
We're really disappointed, especially because we had so many offers before and it was just a big jump. It's not even a small decrease, it was a massive drop.
The government says there are 450,000 buyers and renters ready to get moving. But choosing a new home is such a big decision. And with added restrictions, there's little doubt that an 8-week freeze will have left some with cold feet. Stacey Foster, News at 10.
OK, to Russia now, where the official number of dead from coronavirus is something over 2,000. So on the face of it, they are doing rather a lot better than many other countries, ours included. But once again today, the number of new cases rose by more than 10,000. And the virus and the lockdown are hitting hard in other ways too, pushing up poverty and politically undermining the power of President Putin.
It is a message which echoes in streets across the world. Stay home to stay safe. For many in Russia, that message came too late, and hospital wards are full of those struggling against the strength of the virus and the weakness of the healthcare system. For others, there has been a 6-week lockdown. Lenin, the great revolutionary, for the first time in decades, actually resting in peace in an empty Red Square. However, this pandemic risks a different revolution, as lives and livelihoods are lost. Russia's infection rate has risen as its economy has fallen. The oil price is sliding, whilst unemployment is doubling. For those losing their jobs, there is a one-off payment of just £30.
We pray for an end to the spread of COVID-19.
At the Anglican Church in Moscow, desperate parishioners get small payouts as well as prayers. But it's not enough.
How are people feeling over there?
The really big thing is financial. People who were right on the edge have been pushed over the edge and have nothing. And there isn't the same level of support here for individuals or for small businesses that there is in the United Kingdom. So the concern about the economics is overcoming the concern about the health.
Meanwhile, from his country residents, the president is trying to distance himself, delegating decisions to local governors, but aware this pandemic and the poverty it's causing threaten his power. On VE Day, which should have been a moment to relish his unrivalled position, polls suggested his trust ratings had plummeted from 80% to nearer 20%, just as he seeks voter approval to change the constitution to extend his time in the Kremlin.
How much of a threat does this pose to President Putin?
It's one thing to prolong indefinitely the term in power of a popular president who has been broadly supported, and another thing to try, at least to attempt to prolong the staying power of an incumbent whom the populace doesn't want to see any longer.
We're told the president isn't inclined to trust the polls. His worry must be this crisis may leave voters less inclined to trust him. Emma Murphy, News at 10.
For anglers, golfers and some tennis players too, the day they could take up their favourite sport again could not come soon enough. And for some in England, today was that day. But for them in others, in England alone again, I'm afraid, we should stress there was something else to look forward to. The chance of a longed-for reunion with a friend or family member in a park or other public space.
I know, it's been ages, hasn't it?
For many in England, today was the day to meet again, albeit at a 2-metre distance. For Lauren and Chelsea, the first time since baby Millie was born on the first day of lockdown. 2 mums, 2 babies, their own interpretation of the new rules. For Sue, a trip out to join her daughter, who she hasn't seen in person for more than 7 weeks.
It's been very hard. You do miss them, you know, and I know when I see you today, it will play.
This morning they could finally confirm what we've all come to know, that texts and video calls just aren't the same as meeting up.
It's just lovely to see you.
It's good for me to know my mum's okay, that I can see her and I know face to face she's okay. And it's good for me, I need to see her as well. And I think going forward, hopefully, you know, we will be able to keep doing this.
Others couldn't wait. First thing this morning, queuing to rediscover activities they'd once taken for granted. In this case, fishing, open again with strict new rules. An often solitary pastime which must now be done alone, but for some, that's just fine.
Until this furlough's over, and obviously we're all back to work, I'll probably every other day or so probably come down, or until the missus says, no, you are staying at home.
The tennis court also has a new etiquette. Serve only with your own tennis balls, but the guidance in England means one friend can again face another, separated by the length of the court.
We can do that quite easily playing singles, using either side of the net, and not shaking hands. We can say hello.
We've all kept in touch on WhatsApp groups whilst we've not been able to come down, so we'll arrange to play as singles. It won't be quite the same, but it'll still be terrific.
People in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland will have to wait for their chance to play sport and see friends. Those in England now have to demonstrate they can do it safely. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Nuneaton.
Finally, stuck indoors because of her age but wanting to raise money for the NHS, 91-year-old Margaret Seaman decided to do what she does best, knitting. She's already recreated Great Yarmouth seafront in wool and the Queen's House at Sandringham. This time she thought she'd have a go at a hospital, a Nightingale hospital, of course.
While the government was creating the Nightingale hospitals, Margaret was making the Knittingale.
When you come in the main entrance, you've got reception on your right. Moving along, it's the A&E department. Opposite there is the children's wards with all the different colours. And then we have clinics with waiting rooms. We've got this one for the fracture room and the plaster clinic. We've got doctors and nurses walking around everywhere.
Having already raised tens of thousands of pounds for local charities through her previous knitting projects, the 91-year-old who's in isolation at home in Norfolk decided a hospital was the obvious challenge for these times.
Just to raise some money to do something to help with the virus and everything, I thought, what can I do? I'm no good to go out to work anymore because of my age. But what can I do? And I thought, well, I can knit. I've knitted the other things and raised money with them, Sandringham and the seafront. So why not knit a hospital and raise money for the NHS?
This is a huge undertaking. How many hours a day do you spend on this?
I make a start about 9, and I work 3 more hours when I go to bed at night. At 9 o'clock, I work till 12 o'clock.
Margaret started knitting in earnest 7 years ago to keep herself busy when her husband died. Her recreation of the seafront at Great Yarmouth proved such a hit, she followed it up with her take on the royal home at Sandringham. Her latest creation, still a work in progress, is to raise money for local hospitals. You've been keeping yourself safe at home. I guess this has given you something to do.
It has, yes. Stopped me from getting bored. I hope people will enjoy looking at it. If they enjoy it as much as I have knitting it, that'll be fine.
Of all the ways to say thank you right now, for Margaret, you can't beat wool. Nina Nanar, News at 10 in Norfolk.
How frankly marvellous and deeply impressive is that? Great note to end on. That's all we've got time for. Good night. Thanks for watching.